begin our session today with the reading of the Old 100th, that is to say, Psalm 100, the words of David. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness, come before His presence with singing. Know that ye that the Lord, He is God. It is He who hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are His people, and the sheep of His pasture. Enter into His gates with thanksgiving, into His courts with praise. Be thankful unto Him, and bless His name. For the Lord is good. His mercy is everlasting, and His truth endureth to all generations. Especially the phrase in verse 3. It is He who hath made us, and not we ourselves. About 1,000 years before Christ, there was a young shepherd by the name of David, and he was watching his father's sheep in the Judean hills overlooking the city of Bethlehem. And he gazed up into the Mideastern sky on one occasion, as I'm sure he had done countless other times. And he saw the Little Dipper, I guess, and the Big Dipper and the North Star. But he exclaimed, he said, "When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man, that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that thou visiteth him? And what indeed, and who is man? Where did he come from? Why is he here? And where is he going?" Well, these are the $364 trillion questions. And by the way, how we as men and women answer those three questions will determine our eternal destiny. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 23, verse 7, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." This is the first of 4 sessions on what the Bible says about man. And today our lesson will summarize an introduction to the subject and the origin of man. I'll begin by saying, what is the true worth of a human being? And to some dictators, a man's life is less than a loaf of bread. And if it's one of our little children, then it's priceless. But what is the worth of a human being? The following article appeared in a Reader's Digest magazine some years ago, called "The $6 Million Original." This is what it was titled. And I think it's interesting what the editor said here. Are you tired of hearing that the human body is worth only about $3? And the humbling and humiliating realization that a chicken or a fish sells for more than you are worth? Well, there's news to heal our bruised egos. Yale University biophysicist Harold J. Morowitz says that the human body is actually worth $6 million. And that price covers only the raw materials, the hormones, proteins, enzymes, etc. The intricate work of fashioning the material into human cells. Now notice, this is by Dr. Morowitz, who I do not believe claims to be a believer at all, might cost $6,000 trillion. And assembling these cells, the article goes on to say, into a functioning human being would drain all the world's treasures. Each human being is priceless, is the professor's understatement. Well, that's good, $6 million. Now, that's not a figure to be sneezed at, or even more than that, $6,000 trillion. But really, what is a human worth? I think the main answer we can give here is, what is a human worth to the manufacturer? What is a car worth to General Motors? What is a human being worth to the one who created, who manufactured these human beings? What does the Bible say that I am worth and you are worth to God? John 3:16, "For God so loved the world of men, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life." And then in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, who tasted death for every man. Every human being is worth trillions of times more their weight in diamonds as looked upon and considered by God Himself, who spoke the worlds into existence, but sent His Son to die to redeem that fallen creation. What are we worth to God? Now, this study will briefly review the past and the present and the future estate of God's multi-trillion-dollar piece of work, as it were, man himself, generic man and woman. We're going to look at this, the origin of man today. We've looked at some brief introduction, the origin of man, and there are at least 4 different views concerning man. And I think it's very interesting and very helpful and very important that we rightly understand. I mean, the bottom line is this: are we the product of a muddy glob or of a mighty God? And we've quoted this already, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And so it's very important for us to know, because if we're not responsible to anyone, then it doesn't really make any difference, does it, what we do? But if we believe, as the Bible teaches, that someday all the models, as it were, are going to be called in to answer at the chief engineer, God Himself, then we take it a little more seriously, what we do, what we say, and what we are. But there are 4 views concerning the origin of man. Here we are, but where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? Well, the first view is atheistic materialism, and this view holds that man is the accidental and random product of a blind and non-personal series of chemical and biological events, and simply defined, evolution is that process by which all living organisms have developed from the simple to the more complex forms. And this view would have us believe that all things came about through evolving mud in time past. In other words, if you give enough mud enough time, it will in and by itself produce the music of a Beethoven, the paintings of a Raphael, the writings of a Shakespeare, and the teachings of a Jesus Christ. That's quite a task. You take a jar of mud and you put it on your back porch or wherever and check it out periodically. How long do you think it'll take that jar of mud in and by itself to turn into a rose or a dog or a human mind? Will it happen in a year, a million years, a billion years, a trillion years? Oh, well, yeah, but Wilmington, you don't understand. You don't understand. The atheistic evolutionists would have us believe you give anything enough time and anything is possible. For example, if you let a monkey sit down in a typewriter and he's just clacking away, knowing nothing about it, just pounding on it like a little child, accidentally, after a while, probably that monkey would have composed the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Is that right? Let's make it a little simpler. How long do you think it would take not one monkey, but a million monkeys to write accidentally, not the Encyclopedia Britannica, but to write accidentally the first 10 words in the Bible? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. How long do you think it would take for one of those monkeys of the million? Now, these are non-union monkeys, and they're typing away day and night. Well, if you can consider, someone has figured this out, some creation scientists have figured this out, you can consider a rock that stretches from here to the nearest star some 30 trillion miles. That's a pretty big rock. And here's a tiny little bird, and once each 1,000 years, this little bird comes and lands on this incredibly large rock and removes a tiny little grain of sand and rests for 1,000 years, does the same thing the next 1,000 years, when not one or two or three or four rocks that size have been carried away by this little bird down to the last little grain, then one of those monkeys would have for the first time typed out accidentally the first 10 words in the Bible. But let me tell you something else. If you can, that would be absolutely nothing compared to life coming about accidentally. We have millions and millions and millions and probably billions of protein molecules in our bodies. If you can think, and a scientist friend has helped me with this, if you can think of a protein molecule as a chain, okay, a long chain, call it a protein molecule, and these chains have links, as all chains do, and these links are called amino acids. Now, the average chain, protein molecule, has approximately 400 of these amino acids or these links. But now, how long do you think it would take for, and by the way, they all have to be lined up, these links have to be lined up in a certain way, not just randomly, for that protein molecule to come into existence. How long do you think it would take 400 of these amino acids to do that? Well, let's forget about that. Here's 17 people in a room, and you know them all, and so they're talking and whatever, and you're writing their names down. You got all 17 written down. Now, they don't know the order, but you tell them, let's play a little game here, and I want you to arrange yourselves in whatever order you would like, and let's see how many times it will take for you to arrange yourself in the proper order that I have here on this sheet. Would it be 1 in 17 chances? 1 in 170? A scientist friend of mine told me this, and I didn't believe him at first, but then he proved it to me, and I'll tell you. No, it'd be a little more than just 1 in 17. The chances for 17 people to arrange themselves in just a random way, in a way that would match what you have on paper, would be 1 chance in 355 trillion. Now, when he finished that, he was lecturing to a group of high school kids. I said, you know, doctor, I said, I believe just about anything you'd tell me. You got 2 or 3 PhDs, but that bothers me. 1 in 355 trillion? He said, not only that, Wilmington, but he said, if you add another person, that's 18, then the number jumps to 6 quadrillion, 390 trillion. I said, well, let's get back to the 355 trillion. How do you, he said, that's easy. You can do that. And I said, what do you mean? He said, all you have to do is multiply 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 equals 355 trillion. Now, that's just one protein molecule. And when you think of the billions that we need, and all these amino acids have to be in the right order, it simply means that the chances are absolutely zero. Doesn't make a difference how much time. There are certain things that, regardless how much time you might allow that to happen, could never happen. For example, what are the chances that yesterday never happened? Think about that. What are the chances that a future event occurred last year? What are the chances that you could take 2 mountains and put them together and not have a valley in between? It's not 1 in a trillion. It could never happen. Now, may I read this? I think this is fantastic. Sir Fred Hoyle is one of the most world's famous astronomers. He was knighted by the Queen. That's why it's Sir Fred. For most of his life, he did not believe in God or creation. A number of years ago, he and a friend of his, also a well-known astronomer and an evolutionist who was also an atheist, became interested in the problem of the origin of life. Assuming that the earth was 5 billion years old, they calculated the probability of life evolving on the earth sometime during that 5 billion years. The probability turned out to be 1 chance, to be 1 chance out of the number 1 followed by 40,000 zeros. Of course, that meant there was no possibility at all, so they turned to outer space and conjured that there are possibly 100 billion galaxies in the universe and perhaps 100 billion stars in each galaxy. They also made the assumption that every star in the universe had a planet like the Earth and that the universe is 20 billion years old, and then calculated the probability that life evolved somewhere. For evolutionists, the answer was grim. The chances were so low that for all practical purposes, there was no probability that life had evolved anywhere in the entire universe. Now, I want you to listen to his statement here. Sir Fred Hoyle said, quote, the probability of evolution coming about accidentally is equal to the probability that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard would assemble a Boeing 737 in flight. Zilch, zero chances. Atheistic evolution. There's another view called the pre-Adamic gap theory, and this says that something, and sincere Christians believe this, but I don't, that something terrible happened between the first verse in the Bible and the second verse in the Bible. The first verse in the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and then the second verse said the earth was without form and void, and darkness upon the face of the deep. So the first verse, God, and He's the author of light and order, but in the second verse you have darkness, you have disorder. So something terrible must have happened between the first verse in the Bible and the second verse in the Bible, and that terrible thing was the fall of Satan. And so you have sort of a pre-Adamic subhuman man existing before the fall of Satan, and then beginning in verse 3, God then goes back and He reconstructs His original creation. That's called the gap theory, saying that something happened between Genesis 1 and 2, and that Adam, as we know, is really the second Adam, but the first Adam existed before the fall, or before Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Now, I understand this may be an attempt to appease the evolutionist, because Charles Darwin wrote a book in 1859 called The Origin of the Species, and in this book, Darwin said that the world was not created, there is no God, the world evolved, not in 6 days, but it took millions of years. And so many thought, well, okay, if this is true, it isn't, and there's no evidence back then or today, then we have to sort of account for it. So here, there's a little verse here, there's a bottomless pit between verse 1 and verse 2, and we can throw all these billions of years here. I don't agree with the pre-Adamic, the gap theory, but that's the second view, that actually Adam was God's second invention. The first Adam died during this flood caused by Lucifer. There's a third view called theistic evolution. And this view, as the name implies, says there is a God and that He used the method of evolution to create all things. There are two views under this. One is the original classical view, and that says that God started it. In other words, the little amoeba, and He zapped that into existence. Then He went off on a fishing trip and didn't step in again until man came along, and then eventually He sent His Son to die for men. Well, the problem is that you just can't reconcile that with Genesis, theistic evolution, because Genesis stated that life began on dry ground, but the evolutionist says that even a theistic evolution, it began on some ancient sea bottom or sea top. And Genesis says that birds existed before insects, while evolution reverses the order. Genesis states that birds and fishes were created at the same time, but the evolutionist says fishes evolved hundreds of millions of years before birds developed. So the point is that you can't reconcile Darwin and Moses. I mean, they've had a falling out, and they don't talk to each other. Now, if Darwin is right, Moses is wrong. If Moses is right, Darwin is wrong. And I want to tell you, I believe that Moses has a better track record. So that's theistic evolution. That's the classical view. Now, there is a recent revised view, and this position is known as progressive creationism or threshold evolution. And this says that God did create the amoeba, but then He stepped in at each stage of human development, or each stage of evolution, and He adjusts this, and like a clock maker or a mechanic, they tinker with the car. And so you have a series of miracles. This is progressive creationism, that God was involved in the various change from this life form to this life form. But again, if language means anything, the first verse in the Bible simply says God created. And He spoke out of nothingness, and everything came into existence. And so you have atheistic evolution, you have theistic evolution, you have the pre-Adamic theory, and then the fourth, and I'll spend the last few minutes on this, special creation. This is the view that man is a direct product from the hand of God, and that the statements in Genesis 1 and 2 are to be taken at face value in a literal and a normal way. Now, we always have to add this also, that I believe, and many theologians also would agree, that this means if you take the account in Genesis 1 and 2 in a literal way, that the acts were literal and that everything was done in 6 literal 24-hour days. If language means anything, that's, I believe, what God was teaching us through the pen of Moses in Genesis 1 and 2. And I think there are a number of reasons we can believe this, as indicated by the Hebrew language. I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any sense of the word, but I'm told the Hebrew word for day is yom. And when you have the word yom accompanied by a numerical adjective, it always means a 24-hour day. In other words, the first yom, the second yom, the third yom, and that's exactly what we read here, it means a 24-hour day. And then, as indicated by the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 11, if evolution is correct, it would mean that between each person, such and such begot such and such, there would be a period of 50,000 years. And not only that, if these days are not literal and we try to tie them in with evolution, it means that each day of the 6 days would cover a period of 125 million years. So the first 125 million years God did this, the second 120, I just can't, that's just too much for me. That's too much, I don't have enough faith to believe that. The third indication that Genesis special creation, take it literally, is indicated by Moses at Mount Sinai, where he said, you remember the 4th day and keep it holy, for in 6 days, apparently he thought 24-hour days, God created all things. Not 6 long periods of time, not 6 billion years, but in 6 literal days. And you're to rest on the 7th as God rested on the 7th. And then I think, as indicated by David in Psalm 33, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of His mouth. He spoke, and it was done. So apparently David believed in special creation. And then as indicated by Jesus Himself. I was talking to somebody today, they said, do you think that Adam and Eve were myths? Well, no, Jesus believed in them, and He spoke that God created them, man and wife, Adam and Eve. Special creation, according to the view of the Savior. And then, according to the Apostle Paul, Paul says that the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. So he depicts man being head of the creation because man was created first and then woman taken from his side. And then, as indicated by Edward Young, now that may not mean anything to you, but Edward Young was one of the greatest Hebrew scholars, I guess, of the 20th century. And one of these journals, he writes the following. He says, the 6 days, as understood by the Hebrew language, are to be understood in a chronological sense. That is, that one day followed another in succession. So what are we to believe? An atheistic evolution, theistic evolution, pre-Adamic race, or special creation? Jesus said in John chapter 3, He said to Nicodemus, if I have told you earthly things, and that's the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? There's a song written by Robert Grant, "Oh, worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing His power and His love, our shield and defender, the Ancient of Days, pavilion in splendor, and girded with praise. Frail children of dust," and that's what we are, "and feeble as frail, in Thee do we trust, nor find Thee to fail. Thy mercies how tender, how firm to the end, our Maker, Defender, Redeemer, and Friend." That's what David meant when he wrote in Psalm 100 that He is our shepherd and He is our Creator, because He created us in His own image. And I think that's what David also meant when he wrote in Psalm chapter 8, "When I consider the heavens, what is man that Thou art mindful of him?" Now, I don't understand that either, but I do know this, that God created a creature in His own image, and He called him Adam. And then Adam sinned. And in the fullness of time, God would send His Son to die on the cross to redeem that sinful man. That's what the Bible says.